And thus, with the silent battle underneath fort dominance, the Count of Crash's agenda was thwarted. His ritual was shattered, and God was never seen again. Our heroes' confrontation went unknown for the rest of history. The battle at Crash Castle would ultimately end in Greene's victory, though smaller skirmishes would continue into the next month. This would mark the end of Imperial rule in the wilderness. A week after the victory, Imperial representatives would sit down with Greene and his lieutenants to sign the Treaty of Monteville, finalizing the Imperial evacuation from the wilderness. With the end of the rebellion, Greene's Republic was established as the sole political entity within the wilderness. While most of Greene's army disbanded after the fall of Crash Castle, many of the veterans remained alongside Greene in the establishment of this new republic. A representative republic with local, provincial, and federal governments, the first of its kind in a world of monarchies. David Greene would move on to become president of Greene's Republic, serving as its president for 2 3-year terms. He established many of the precedents for future presidents to follow. After his service to the newfound government was completed, he simply retired and returned to his farmstead to live out the rest of his days in peace. Charlie L. Wesley became Greene's Republic's first internal affairs minister. His policies would quickly lead to a boost in living conditions across Greene's Republic, in spite of a seemingly insurmountable task of rebuilding. After Greene's retirement, he would run for president himself, only to be narrowly beat out by Nathaniel Yellowson. Charlie would be offered the position of Wilderness Frontier Master, managing eastward expansion for the next few decades until his retirement. Anton Ordonovich Rienchi would become the head of Greene's Republic's army. He would quickly train Greene's army to become a shining example of discipline and resourcefulness. On multiple occasions, he would single-handedly lead Greene's army to many new victories, leaving behind the legacy that the Republic's army strictly followed the best defense is a good offense tactic, and could not be bested in battle. He would be slain during battle several decades later. In a letter left behind on his body, he wrote, "I have no regrets. I leave this life for the next." The newfound republic, however, would struggle financially for several decades. It lacked the necessary economic expertise within the government to truly shine. The republic would also struggle heavily with establishing relations with foreign entities, especially the nobility of the empire. This lack of legitimacy would make it hard for Greene's Republic to establish itself on the world stage. The town of Monteville would quickly develop into the trade hub of the Republic, becoming the largest port city in the New World. Most intercontinental trade routes would pass through this town, and it would help to alleviate the economic troubles of the Republic. Crash Castle would end up remaining, but repurposed as a fortress strictly for the defense of the northern coast of the Republic. For its first 2 years, it would also function as a temporary capital. A town would later spring up nearby, becoming known as Crash City. Fort Dominance would be deconstructed, and its land would be returned to the descendants of Cartoon Network. Though the imposing building was gone, the scars it left behind would remain for centuries to come. Sullivan's Manor would become an important stop for settlers heading to the frontier of the wilderness. It would later develop into a flourishing town, Sulberg, and become the capital of Greene's Republic. The manor itself would be renovated into the president's office, retaining its name. After its use during the rebellion, Camp Alexis would be retired as a military camp after hostilities ceased. However, it would become an important settlement on the frontier and the main base for the woodsmen. It would later become the largest city in the Republic, earning the name Alexis City. Natives all across the wilderness would experience a short period of peace before disputes with eastward traveling settlers began anew. The natives would struggle in vain for about a century before finally the last few native resistances would be stamped out. John and Luke's plantation would spark the biggest and most heated national debate in Greene's Republic at the time. It would become a central piece of argument over native rights, and after it was abolished and repurposed into a regular farm, would become a major black spot on our hero's legacy. After the victory of Greene's army over its oppressors, the Empire would experience a long and hectic couple decades of civil unrest. It would lose its current punitive war, becoming the first time since the Empire's inception that it had lost territory, followed by several successful rebellions in the Westlands. The Empire would re-stabilize after, but would never recover. Hundreds of thousands of people continued to live under this oppressive rule until the collapse a century and a half later. After a decade of being gone, Dale Vallon would return from his trip out east to establish Rosenthal University. It would go on to compete with overseas schools as one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Dale would live out the rest of his life as a professor at the school, teaching about physical and ethereal mechanics. Dr. Rosenthal would not return with Dale, feeling as if his job was incomplete. He would remain east for a decade and a half longer. Then, with a team of scientists, he would venture into the Nether in an attempt to finalize understanding of this strange dimension. He would by chance come across Purgatory, where him and his team would work to free the spirit trapped there. Dr. Rosenthal would remain in the Nether until he succumbed to the pressure of the ambiance. His body would never be recovered after a piglin attack on his camp. The war in the Nether would not last much longer than Greene's rebellion. Suddenly, the Nether Kingdom surrendered, despite the continued stalemate, then vanished from the dimension without a trace. The cult of the Nether, while they had won their war, would never fully recover. Recruiter Ingene, now banished from the cult he called home, would wander the Nether for the rest of his life. He would mostly become a legend in both dimensions, as his existence would be forgotten. Despite this, the legend says that a strange black-robed figure with a scar across his face was seen leaving the capital of the Nether Kingdom the day before its sudden surrender and eventual disappearance. Limiter Augustus would continue to serve as limiter of Site Gamma until after the end of the war. He would do so for several years before information came out that he had leaked information about Site Olivia to the Nether Kingdom during the war. He would be expelled from the cult shortly after. Thus concludes our story. Though it would be told for centuries, our heroes would fade into the realm of myth and folktale. They would not be forgotten, but certainly the validity of such accomplishments would be questioned. But yet, there is still one more thing which our heroes need to take care of.